I never believed in heat signatures from the dead until I felt one myself. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I have worked as a caretaker at Meadow Rest Memorial Gardens in Portland, Oregon for 7 years. In that time, I've tended thousands of niches in our columbarium, polished brass nameplates until they gleamed, and learned to recognize grief in all its quiet forms. The work is meditative, predictable rows of stone, flowers replaced weekly, the soft echo of footsteps on marble floors. I preferred it that way. Routine kept the weight of it manageable. The urn appeared in niche 217 on a Tuesday morning in November. Standard brushed brass, sealed properly, nameplate engraved with care. Margaret Adelaide Chen, the plate read. Born August 4th, 1943, died March 9th, 2028. I remember pausing when I first dusted it. The date made me check my phone. It was November 6th, 2025. The death date was 3 years in the future. I assumed it was a clerical error. We'd had misprints before, transposed numbers, wrong middle initials. I made a note to contact the family and continued my rounds. But when I returned an hour later to polish the glass, I noticed something else. The urn was warm, not room temperature. Warm, like someone had been holding it. I pulled my hand back, then touched it again to be sure. The brass radiated gentle heat, the kind that comes from living skin. Around it, condensation had begun to form on the glass front of the niche, small droplets beating and running down like tears. I checked the columbarium's climate control. 68 degrees, stable, no sunlight reached that wall, no heating vents nearby. I pressed my palm flat against the neighboring niches, all cool stone and metal. Only 217 held warmth. That afternoon, I watched the first visitor approach it. A middle-aged woman in a gray coat, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. She stopped 3 feet from the niche, staring at the nameplate. Her hands trembled. The flowers fell to the floor, and she turned and walked out without a word. She moved quickly, almost running by the time she reached the door. The lilies lay there until I swept them up at closing. Over the next week, I began keeping a log. Every morning when I arrived, the urn was warm. Every evening when I locked up, condensation covered the glass. I wiped it clean each time, but by the next morning, it had returned, tiny droplets that caught the light, turning the niche into something that looked like it was weeping. 3 more visitors came during that week. An elderly man who stood silent for 30 seconds before leaving. A young couple who whispered to each other, then hurried away. A teenager who placed her hand on the glass, then jerked it back as if burned. Each one left within moments. None of them stayed long enough to grieve. I tried to research Margaret Adelaide Chen. No obituary, no social media presence, no records in our database beyond the niche purchase order, which listed an address that didn't exist when I checked the map. The phone number went to a disconnected line. On the 8th day, I arrived early. The columbarium was empty, the morning light filtering through stained glass windows in bands of gold and red. I walked directly to niche 217. The warmth had increased. I could feel it radiating outward before I even touched the brass. The condensation was heavier now, running in steady streams. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass. Behind the moisture, I saw movement. Not the urn itself, something inside the niche, behind the sealed urn, where there should have been only stone and shadow. A disturbance in the air, like heat rising from summer pavement. It shifted and pulsed, pressing against the glass from within. I stepped back. My hand found my phone, and I pulled up the security camera feed from my office app. I rewound to the previous night, watching the timestamp roll backward through empty hours. At 3:42 a.m., a figure appeared in the frame. A woman, elderly, moving slowly down the row of niches. She stopped at 2:17, placed her hand on the glass, stood there for 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Then she turned toward the camera. Her face was Margaret Adelaide Chen's face from the nameplate photo I'd found in our files. Same narrow chin, same deep-set eyes. But her expression was wrong. Too still, too focused, like she was looking through the camera directly at me, watching from 3 days in the future. She walked out of frame. I checked every other camera angle. She never appeared again, not in the parking lot, not in the entrance hall. She simply vanished after leaving the columbarium floor. I went back to 217. The warmth was fading now, cooling degree by degree beneath my palm. The condensation began to evaporate, leaving the glass clear. The nameplate caught the light differently than before. I leaned in, studying the engraved letters. The death date had changed. March 9th, 2026. 1 year closer. I reported the nameplate error to my supervisor. He assured me he'd look into it. I didn't mention the warmth or the footage or the visitors who fled. Some things sound too strange when spoken aloud, but I still tend that niche every morning. I still feel the heat against my skin, watch the glass fog and clear in its own rhythm. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the columbarium at closing time, I hear footsteps behind me, soft, measured, patient. I never turn around. The death date on the nameplate changes every few months now. Each time I check, it's crept forward. 2027, 2028. Getting closer to a moment I don't understand, but can't stop watching approach. Margaret Adelaide Chen hasn't been born yet, according to every record I can find. But she's dying in that niche year by year in a future that hasn't happened, and she's warm to the touch, like she's still alive. Some graves won't stay buried, no matter how deep you dig. My name is Rafael Ibarra, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at Hillcrest Memorial Park in Tacoma, Washington, for 12 years. In that time, I've learned that soil has its own language, the way it settles, the way it accepts what we give it, the way it sometimes refuses. Most people think groundskeeping is simple labor, but there's an art to reading the earth, to knowing when something's wrong before you see it with your eyes. Plot 4 Jay taught me that some things buried don't want to rest. The urn came to us in April of 2023. Bronze vessel, 8 inches tall, containing the cremated remains of Thomas Whitmore, 71 years old. No service, no mourners, just a niece who purchased the plot and requested burial beneath the young maple tree in Section 4. She wanted it done quickly and quietly. We obliged. I dug the hole myself, 18 inches down, just below the root line, exactly to specification. The soil was good, dark, loamy, free of rocks, the kind that holds things gently. I placed the urn, covered it, tamped the earth flat, and marked the spot with a small bronze plate flush with the ground. Clean work. Professional. I moved on to other tasks and thought nothing more of it. The first rain came 3 days later. Heavy Pacific Northwest downpour, the kind that turns the memorial park into a patchwork of mud and standing water. I arrived the next morning to find Plot 4J exposed. The urn sat on the surface, perfectly upright, facing east toward the sunrise. Soil clung to its sides, but the bronze gleamed through. I checked the plate, still in place, undisturbed, but the urn itself had risen through 18 inches of packed earth overnight. I assumed animals. We'd had problems with raccoons digging before. I reburied the urn, this time going 24 inches deep and placing a wire mesh over it before filling the hole. The maple tree's roots were starting to curl around the burial site, thin white tendrils reaching down into the soil. I trimmed them back and smoothed everything over. 2 weeks later, another storm, another morning with the urn on the surface. This time it faced south. The mesh was undisturbed. No scratches, no tears, no signs of animal activity. The soil looked almost intentionally excavated, neat, precise, like someone had carefully lifted the urn through solid earth without displacing anything around it. I called my supervisor. He suggested I cement it in place. I mixed a small batch of concrete, dug down 30 inches this time, and encased the urn in a solid block. I gave it 3 days to cure before covering it back up. It rained again on the 4th day. When I arrived the next morning, the urn sat on top of the concrete block, which had been pushed up through the soil like a tooth working its way out of a gum. The urn faced just now, toward the sunset. The maple tree had changed. Its roots had stopped growing downward. Instead, they'd begun spiraling around the burial site in tight, concentric circles, patterns that shouldn't form naturally. The tree itself looked healthy, but something in the way its branches moved made me uncomfortable. They swayed even when there was no wind. I started documenting everything with my phone, photos of the urn's position each time it surfaced, measurements of the root patterns, notes on which direction it faced. The pattern became clear over the next 2 months. After every significant rain, the urn surfaced. Each time, it faced a different cardinal direction: north, south, east, west. Then it started over, north again, south again. The roots continued their spiral, growing thicker and more densely interwoven. I tried cutting them back, but they regrew within days, always following the same circular pattern. The spiral was tightening, like the tree was slowly wrapping itself around something beneath the surface, something deeper than where I'd buried the urn. I stopped reburying it in August, partly because I knew it wouldn't stay down. partly because I'd started having dreams about hands pushing up through soil, fingers wrapped around bronze, pulling it toward air and light. The niece called in September. I hadn't heard from her since the burial. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was forcing herself to speak. Has anything unusual happened with my uncle's remains? I hesitated. Then I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly, carefully chosen. My uncle spent 40 years as a surveyor. He walked land, marked boundaries, established coordinates. He always said the earth remembers direction better than people do, that if you listen closely enough, you can hear it turning. I don't understand, I said. Neither did I, but he made me promise to bury him beneath a tree with a strong root system. He said he needed to know which way was north when everything went dark. She hung up before I could respond. I went back to plot 4J that afternoon. The urn was facing north again, perfectly aligned with true north according to my compass. The maple's roots had formed a complete circle now, a spiral mandala carved into the earth around the burial site. At the center, where the urn had first been buried, the soil had begun to sink, creating a small depression. I knelt and placed my hand against the ground. I felt it immediately, a vibration, subtle but constant, like a heartbeat deep in the earth, rhythmic, patient, endless. The tree's branches moved overhead. No wind, just movement. I don't rebury the urn anymore. Every few weeks, I check on it, and every time, it's turned to face a new direction. The spiral roots keep growing, keep tightening. The depression at the center keeps sinking. Last week, I noticed something else. Small objects have started appearing around the urn, stones, pieces of metal, fragments of glass, all aligned to the cardinal directions, all placed with precision. I never see anyone near plot 4J. The cameras show nothing but empty grass and shifting shadows. But Thomas Whitmore is still surveying, still marking his territory, still establishing his coordinates in the dark. And the earth keeps turning beneath him, exactly the way he said it would. The urn phased east this morning. I checked my compass to be sure. Tomorrow, if it rains, I know it will move again. I just don't know what happens when the spiral finally closes. The dead don't visit their own graves, or so I thought. My name is Marcus Campos, and I have served as director of Sycamore Valley Cemetery in Austin, Texas, for 19 years. In that time, I've witnessed every expression of grief the human heart can produce: rage, silence, disbelief, acceptance. I've learned to give families space, to recognize when someone needs to talk and when they need to be left alone. But I never learned what to do when the deceased visits herself. Eleanor Voss died on February 14th, 2025. Heart failure, peaceful, at home with family present. Her daughter arranged for cremation and interment in our columbarium, niche 342 in the eastern wing. The service was small, attended by perhaps a dozen people. I remember Eleanor's daughter weeping quietly as she placed the urn in its niche, her hand lingering on the glass. She loved roses, the daughter said. White roses, especially. I made a note in our records. Small details matter to families. They returned to them later, finding comfort in specificity. The daughter visited weekly for the first month, then twice monthly. Then her visits stopped. It happens often. Grief doesn't follow a schedule, and sometimes the hardest thing is continuing to show up when the loss feels permanent. But someone else kept visiting. I first noticed it during a routine review of our security footage. We check the cameras weekly, scanning for vandalism or maintenance issues. The Eastern Wing camera covers the entire columbarium hallway, recording motion-activated clips throughout the day and night. At 3:14 a.m. on a Thursday in late March, an elderly woman appeared in the frame. She moved slowly down the row of niches, her posture careful, deliberate. She stopped at 342, Eleanor Voss's niche, and stood there for several minutes. Then she placed something on the small shelf below the urn. White roses. I rewound the footage to see where she'd come from. The cameras showed her walking down the hallway, but she never appeared in the entrance footage. It was as if she'd materialized halfway down the corridor. I assumed a camera glitch and moved on. The next Thursday, 3:14 a.m., she appeared again. Same slow walk, same stop at 3:42, same white roses placed carefully on the shelf. This time, I watched the entire sequence more carefully. The woman wore a long gray coat and moved with the stiffness of advanced age. Her white hair was pulled back neatly. Her face remained angled away from the camera, but something in her posture felt familiar. I checked our visitor log. No sign-ins for that time. No security alerts. No other cameras triggered. I called Eleanor's daughter. Has anyone else been visiting your mother's niche? An elderly woman, perhaps? She paused. No. Why? We've had someone leaving flowers. I wanted to make sure it was family. White roses? Yes. Her voice changed, became smaller. My mother always brought white roses to her own mother's grave every Thursday for 30 years until she couldn't drive anymore. I see, I said, though I didn't. Is something wrong, Mr. Campos? I should have told her then, but I said it was just a routine check and ended the call. The following Thursday, I stayed late. I positioned myself in the office with a clear view of the security monitor, watching the columbarium camera feed. At 3:10 a.m., I made coffee. At 3:13, I leaned forward. At 3:14, she appeared. I watched her walk down the hallway, her movements identical to the previous recordings. She stopped at Eleanor's niche, placed the roses, stood silently. I went to the columbarium immediately. The hallway was empty. No woman, no roses on the shelf. But on the monitor, she was still there, standing, unmoving, her face finally turning toward the camera. It was Eleanor Voss, not similar, not resembling. Eleanor exactly as she'd looked in the photographs her daughter had provided for the memorial service. The same narrow shoulders, the same careful posture, the same white hair. I stood in the empty hallway, watching the monitor show me a woman who was currently ashes in the niche she was visiting. She raised one hand to the glass, touched it gently, the way you might touch a window to see if it's raining on the other side. Then she turned and walked back down the hallway, disappearing at the same point she'd appeared. I checked the footage from every Thursday since her death. She was there every time. 3:14 a.m. White roses. 5 minutes at her own niche. Then gone. I pulled Eleanor's intake paperwork from our files, looking for anything unusual. Standard cremation authorization, signed by her daughter. Medical examiner's release. Nothing remarkable, except for one note in the margin of the transport log, written by one of our staff. Patient very peaceful, rosary beads in hand. Requested we place white roses with her before cremation. We had. I remembered it now. A single white rose placed in her hands before the cremation process. I started arriving early every Thursday. I never saw her in person, only on camera, but she never missed a visit. 3:14 a.m. every week, white roses that appeared on camera but never existed in physical space. In June, Eleanor's daughter called. She'd decided to visit the niche again. The first time in months, she went on a Thursday afternoon. When she called me that evening, her voice was shaking. There were white roses on the shelf, fresh ones, but I didn't bring them. I didn't know what to say. Mr. Campos, my mother died in February. Who's bringing her flowers? I wanted to tell her the truth, that her mother brings them herself, that every Thursday at 3:14 in the morning, Eleanor Voss visits her own ashes, places white roses she carried through whatever threshold separates death from this, and stands silently in front of the glass. Instead, I said, I'm not sure, but they're always white roses, always fresh, always Thursdays. That was her visiting day, the daughter whispered, when she visited Grandma Thursday mornings before the cemetery got crowded. We both fell silent. The daughter hasn't returned since that call. The white roses keep appearing on camera. Eleanor keeps her Thursday appointments, punctual even in death. I watch sometimes, late on Wednesday nights, waiting for 3:14 a.m. I've learned to recognize the subtle shift in air temperature when she's about to appear. The way the hallway lights flicker just before she manifests on screen. Last week, something changed. She paused at the camera, looking directly into it. Her mouth moved, shaping words I couldn't hear. I'm having the audio enhanced. Part of me doesn't want to know what she's saying. Part of me needs to understand why the dead return to mourn themselves. But I already know the answer, don't I? Eleanor never stopped visiting. Death didn't break her ritual. It only changed the threshold she has to cross to keep her appointment. The white roses are waiting on the shelf again tonight. 3:14 a.m. is 7 minutes away. Peace is supposed to be permanent, but sometimes it's just something we promise the dead. My name is Silas Merrick, and I have worked as a mortician at Riverside Memorial Chapel in Burlington, Vermont, for 22 years. In that time, I've prepared in over 3,000 bodies for their final rest, learned to see past the violence death can do to a face, and developed a steady hand that doesn't shake even when the work is difficult. The job requires precision and respect in equal measure. You maintain both, or you don't last. Niche. 12B holds the remains of David Brennan, 63 years old when he died. Stroke, sudden, no suffering according to the medical report. His wife requested cremation and asked that we place the urn in our memorial wall ourselves. She couldn't bear to do it. I understood. Grief has its limits. The obituary ran in the local paper 2 days after his death. I always read them, checking our work against the family's words. David's was brief, professional. After a long struggle, David has finally found peace. The phrase caught my attention. Long struggle usually meant illness, but the death certificate said stroke. I made a note to polish the brass plate on his niche with extra care. Small gestures matter when words reveal more than medical records. I placed the urn in 12B myself on a Friday afternoon in October. Standard bronze vessel, sealed properly, nameplate engraved with David's full name and dates. The niche is in the west wall of our memorial chapel, 4th row from the floor, easy to reach for cleaning. I slid the urn into place, secured the glass panel, and locked it. The brass plate gleamed. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked. By Monday morning, the plate had tarnished black. Not the gradual oxidation brass develops over time, complete black, as if someone had applied chemical treatment overnight. I'd polished it Friday. 3 days shouldn't produce that kind of change. I removed the glass panel and took the plate to my workroom, using specialized polish designed for memorial brass. It took 20 minutes of steady work to restore the shine. I checked the urn itself while I had access. Perfectly normal, seal intact, no damage. I replaced everything and made another note in the maintenance log. By Wednesday, the plate was black again. I tried different cleaning methods. Chemical removers, ultrasonic cleaning, professional grade treatments we normally reserved for antique fixtures. Each time, the brass returned to its original luster. Each time, within 48 hours, it was black again. The pattern held for 2 weeks. Polish on Monday, black by Wednesday, polish on Friday, black by Sunday. Then I started hearing the scratching. It began during evening rounds, that quiet hour after visiting hours end, when I walk through the chapel checking locks and turning off lights. A soft sound, rhythmic, like fingernails on metal, coming from the west wall. I pressed my ear against 12B. The scratching was inside the niche, behind the sealed glass, where nothing could move. I checked the adjacent niches. Silent. Only 12B produced sound. The next evening, I brought a stethoscope from our preparation room, medical grade, designed to detect the faintest sounds in still bodies. I placed it against the glass panel of 12B and listened. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause, deliberate, measured, patient. I checked the urn's seal again, intact. The scratching couldn't be coming from inside the bronze vessel. The sound was too close to the glass, too surface level, but there was nothing else in the niche, just stone backing and the urn itself. I called David's wife. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice careful. Mrs. Brennan, I have a question about your husband's obituary. Silence. The phrase, finally found peace. Can you tell me what that referred to? More silence. Then, why are you asking? Just routine follow-up. We like to ensure our memorials reflect the family's wishes. David had difficulties toward the end. He couldn't settle, couldn't rest. The doctors called it agitation, but it was more than that. Her voice dropped. He kept saying he couldn't get comfortable, that something was wrong, that he needed to get out. Out of where? Wherever he was. The hospital, our home, his own body, I think. He was trapped in something, and he knew it. I see. Mr. Merrick, is something wrong with his niche? I should have told her about the tarnishing, about the scratching. Instead, I said everything was fine and ended the call. That night, I stayed late. I sat in the chapel after midnight, watching 12B from across the room. At 1:37 a.m., the scratching began. Louder this time, more insistent. I approached slowly, my phone recording video. The sound was definitely coming from behind the glass. I could see the urn through the panel, motionless, sealed, exactly where I'd placed it weeks ago. But the scratching continued, and beneath it, something else. A sound like breathing, slow and labored, the way David might have breathed after the stroke, fighting for each inhale. I pressed my hand against the glass. The surface was cold, but behind it, I felt vibration. Rhythmic, desperate, the seal on the urn began to turn. Not quickly, just a fraction of a rotation, barely visible, the threaded lid twisting counterclockwise against its base. I watched it move maybe an eighth of an inch before it stopped. I checked the niche at dawn. The seal hadn't moved from its new position. But on the marble shelf below the glass panel, I found something that shouldn't exist. Metal shavings. Tiny curls of brass, the kind produced by drilling or grinding. They lay in a small pile, fresh and bright against the dark stone. I collected them in a sample bag and took them to a metallurgist I knew from equipment maintenance. He confirmed they were brass, matching the composition of memorial nameplates. Under microscope, they showed tool marks. Consistent with manual filing, he said. Something scraped these off from the inside. I stopped polishing the nameplate after that. I let it stay black. The scratching continued. Every evening at closing time, every night if I stayed late enough to listen. The seal on the urn rotated another eighth inch the following week, then another. David's wife never visited. She called once, asking if we could move the urn to a different niche. Why? I asked. He keeps asking to leave. Asking. I hear him at night in my house, scratching at the bedroom door. Her voice broke. He never found peace, Mr. Merrick. The obituary lied. I just wanted it to be true. I told her we couldn't move the urn without proper authorization. She hung up without responding. That was 6 weeks ago. The seal has rotated nearly a full turn now. Another week, maybe 2, and it will be completely unscrewed. I don't know what happens then. I don't know if the urn can be opened from the inside, or if something inside it is trying anyway. The brass plate stays black no matter how often I clean it now. The metal shavings appear daily. The scratching has developed a pattern. 3 long scratches, 2 short, pause, 3 long, 2 short, over and over. Morse code, I realized last Tuesday. SOS. I lock the chapel earlier now. I don't stay for evening rounds. Whatever David Brennan is doing inside 12B, he's doing it alone. But I still hear the scratching sometimes, even when I'm home, even when I'm nowhere near the memorial chapel. 3 long, 2 short, patient and endless, finally found peace, the obituary said. The sound suggests otherwise. Children leave handprints everywhere, but never from the inside. My name is Lucia Reyes, and I have served as cemetery manager at Pine Haven Memorial Gardens in Spokane, Washington, for 16 years. In that time, I've overseen thousands of burials, cremations, and memorial services, learning to balance compassion with efficiency, grief with paperwork. Our memorial chapel houses 40 decorative urns in glass display cases, families who wanted something more visible than a columbarium niche, something visitors could see and remember. The urn in case 7 contains the ashes of Colonel Henry Ashford. 92 years old when he died, decorated veteran, Bronze Custer recipient, survivor of conflicts I'm not old enough to remember. His military funeral was dignified and well attended. The urn itself is distinguished, polished copper with an engraved American flag, sealed and placed in the case with full honors. I noticed the movement during my morning rounds in late September. The case sits in the chapel's south alcove, mounted at eye level against oak paneling. 8 urns share the wall, each in its own glass-fronted display with small brass plaques. I clean them weekly, removing dust and fingerprints, ensuring the glass stays crystal clear. Case 7's urn had shifted, not dramatically, maybe half an inch to the left of center, the kind of movement you'd attribute to vibration from nearby construction or someone bumping the wall, except we had no construction scheduled and the chapel had been locked overnight. I centered the urn and continued my rounds. The next morning, it had moved again, this time to the right, past its original position. I checked the case's mounting, secure, properly anchored to the wall studs. No looseness, no structural issues. I made a note in the maintenance log and centered the urn again. By the 3rd morning, I started measuring. I used a ruler and marked the urn's position with pencil on the shelf. That evening, before locking up, I confirmed its placement, perfectly centered, exactly where I'd left it. The next morning, it had moved 3 inches left. I reviewed the security footage. Our cameras cover the chapel entrance and main floor, but not the individual alcoves, budget limitations. The footage showed no one entering the chapel overnight. No visitors, no staff, just empty pews and dim emergency lighting. I called our maintenance contractor, thinking perhaps settling or temperature changes were causing shelf warping. He inspected case 7 thoroughly, checking the wood, the glass, the mounting brackets. Everything's solid, he said. This shelf could hold 50 pounds without shifting. One urn shouldn't move at all. But it does. He shrugged. Maybe it's the old soldier marching. They say veterans never really stand down. He meant it as a joke. I didn't laugh. The movement continued daily. Left, then right, then back to center. No pattern I could discern. I stopped trying to correct it. and simply documented each position with photographs. Then I found the handprints. I was cleaning the glass on a Friday afternoon using standard glass cleaner and microfiber cloth. The outside was dusty but normal. When I leaned close to wipe the corners, I saw them on the inside of the glass. Small handprints, child sized, 5 distinct prints, fingers splayed, pressed against the glass from within the sealed case. I froze, my cloth still against the outer surface. The prints were clear, whorls and ridges visible in the condensation that had formed on the interior glass. But the case had been sealed since Colonel Ashford's urn was placed. There was no way for anyone to touch the inside. I photographed them immediately, then opened the case. I wiped the inside glass carefully, removing every trace of the handprints. The urn sat silent and still. I checked its seal, intact. I examined the case's backing, solid oak, no gaps or access points. I locked the case and went home early, my hands shaking. The handprints returned overnight. This time, there were 7 of them, scattered across the glass at different heights, all child-sized, all pressed outward, as if someone small was pushing against the glass from inside the case, trying to get out. I researched Colonel Ashford's service record. He'd served with distinction, retired honorably, lived a quiet life after the military. No controversies, no dark history. His obituary mentioned his wife, who died 10 years earlier, and his daughter, who'd arranged the service. No mention of children. I called the daughter. She was polite but puzzled by my questions. Did your father have any other children? Grandchildren? No, I'm an only child, and I never had kids. Why? I hesitated. There have been some irregularities with the memorial case. I wanted to make sure I had complete family information. What kind of irregularities? I couldn't tell her about the handprints, about the urn that moved on its own. Instead, I asked about his military service. Did your father ever mention anything unusual from his service years? Anything that troubled him? Long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. He didn't talk about the war much, but toward the end, when the dementia started, he would sometimes wake up crying. He kept apologizing to someone, saying he didn't know, that they were just children. Children? I never understood what he meant. The doctors said it was confusion, memory fragments. War does things to men's minds. She paused. Mr. Reyes, is something wrong with my father's urn? No, ma'am. Everything is fine. But it wasn't fine. I started staying late, watching Case 7 from across the chapel. At 8:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, I saw it happen. The urn moved, slid 3 inches left, smooth and deliberate, with no vibration or external force. And on the glass, while I watched, a small handprint appeared. Then another, then 3 more, blooming like frost patterns in the condensation that shouldn't exist in a climate-controlled chapel. I approached slowly, my phone recording. The handprints continued forming, small palms, tiny fingers, pressed against the glass from inside. They overlapped each other, clustering at the center of the case, all pushing outward. I placed my own hand against the outer glass, matching one of the prints. My palm was twice the size. The temperature in the alcove dropped. My breath fogged, and from inside the case I heard something I'll never forget. A child's voice, faint, muffled by glass and death and decades. We didn't know, we didn't know. Not Colonel Ashford's voice, a child's voice, thin and frightened, repeating the same words the colonel had cried in his dementia. We didn't know. I stepped back. The handprints remained, dozens now, covering the entire interior glass surface. Small hands, young hands, pushing, reaching, trying to escape whatever space they occupied inside that sealed case with the decorated veteran's ashes. I haven't opened case 7 since that night. I clean the outside glass weekly, removing dust and fingerprints that visitors leave. But the inside stays unchanged, covered in small handprints that appear and disappear according to rhythms I don't understand. The urn still moves. Every night, a different position. Sometimes it faces the wall, sometimes the chapel entrance. Sometimes it's turned completely around, as if looking at something behind it that I can't see. Colonel Ashford's daughter never visits. I don't blame her, but sometimes, when I lock the chapel at night, I see the handprints glowing faintly in the emergency lighting, small and desperate, pressing outward. And I wonder what the old soldier brought home from the war, sealed in bronze and hidden in his ashes. What children he carries with him still. Some things are heavier than they should be, and I learned not to ask why. My name is Morris Grant, and I have worked as a caretaker at Evergreen Memorial Columbarium in Portland, Maine for 14 years. In that time, I've handled thousands of urns, bronze, ceramic, marble, wood. I know their weights by feel, can tell when one's been filled properly or when the cremains have settled unevenly. It's muscle memory, the kind that comes from repetition and attention to detail. The urn in niche 823 weighs wrong. It arrived in May of 2024. Standard brass construction, 10 inches tall, sealed and certified. The nameplate read, Jonathan Kavanaugh Gay, born March 2nd, 1956, died April 19th, 2024. His sister arranged the placement. Quiet woman, didn't say much beyond the necessary details. She asked that we handle everything. She didn't want to be present for the installation. I placed the urn myself on a Wednesday afternoon. When I lifted it from its transport container, I immediately noticed the weight. Not just heavy, impossibly heavy. The urn should have weighed maybe 4 pounds with cremains. This felt like 15, maybe 20. Dense and solid, like lifting a small anvil. I assumed an error. Perhaps the crematory had used a heavier urn than specified or included something else with the remains. I made a note to call them, but the sister had already left, and I didn't want to alarm her with technical questions on the day of placement. I installed the urn in 823, my arms straining more than they should have. The niche is in the lower section, easy to access for cleaning. I secured the glass panel and locked it, my shoulders aching from the effort. The weight stayed with me. I kept thinking about it during my evening rounds, the unnatural heft of that brass vessel. 4 pounds should feel like 4 pounds. This felt wrong. I called the crematory the next morning. They confirmed standard procedures: 6 pounds of cremains, standard brass urn, nothing unusual. When I mentioned the weight, the operator paused. Did the family request anything additional be placed with the remains? Not that I'm aware of. Then it shouldn't be heavy. Our urns are consistent. You want us to check our records? Please. They called back an hour later. Everything was standard. No additional materials, no errors in processing. The urn should weigh exactly what their paperwork indicated. I went back to 823 during my afternoon rounds. I opened the glass panel and lifted the urn out, setting it on a cart. My arms trembled under the strain. I carried it to our receiving room and placed it on a digital scale. 23.4 pounds. I weighed it 3 more times. Same result. 23.4 pounds of impossibility sitting in a standard brass urn that should contain maybe 6 pounds of cremated remains. I photographed the reading and sent it to the crematory. They didn't respond. That evening, Jonathan Kavanaugh's sister called. Her voice was tight, controlled. "Mr. Grant, I have a question about my brother's urn." "Yes, ma'am." "When you clean the niche, does the urn ever feel unusual to you?" I hesitated. "In what way?" "Heavy. Heavier than it should be." My hand tightened on the phone. "You felt it?" "I lifted it once, before the cremation. They let me hold it empty to approve the selection. It weighed nothing, maybe a pound, but when I touched the glass panel yesterday, I could feel the weight even through the barrier, like it was pulling downward." "Mrs. Kavanaugh, I need to ask you something. Was there anything unusual about your brother's death?" Long silence. Traffic sounds in the background. She was calling from a car, driving somewhere she didn't want to arrive. "Jonathan drowned, Lake Michigan, during a fishing trip. They didn't find his body for 6 days." "I'm sorry." "They told me water remains in the tissues even after cremation, that the weight difference would be negligible, but I keep wondering what else came back with him." "What do you mean?" "The lake where he drowned, it's deep, very deep, and old. My grandmother used to say things live in the deep places, things that wait for bodies to sink to them. I never believed her." Her voice cracked. "Have you ever heard knocking sounds from the niche, Mr. Grant?" My breath stopped. "Why do you ask?" "Because I hear them, at night, in my apartment, like someone knocking from inside a locked room." "But I live alone." She hung up before I could respond. I stayed late that night, sitting in the columbarium after closing. 823 was visible from my position in the main seating area. I waited, watching the rows of niches, listening to the building settle. At 9:47 p.m., I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate strikes, muffled but distinct, coming from the lower section. I approached slowly, my phone flashlight cutting through the dim emergency lighting. The sound was coming from 823. I pressed my ear against the glass panel. Nothing. Then 3 more knocks, so close I felt the vibration through the barrier. Knock, knock, knock. Not random, not settling, deliberate percussion from inside the sealed urn. I opened the glass panel with shaking hands. The urn sat motionless, its brass surface gleaming in my flashlight beam. I placed my palm against it. Cold, wet, cold, like metal that's been submerged in ice water. Condensation formed under my hand, droplets running down the brass. Knock. The vibration traveled through the metal into my palm. Something inside the urn was moving. Something was striking the interior walls with force and intention. Knock, knock. I pulled my hand away. The condensation remained, spreading across the brass surface in patterns that looked almost like fingerprints. Large fingerprints. Adult-sized, pressed against the interior of the urn from within. I backed away, securing the glass panel. The knocking continued. 3 strikes, pause, 3 strikes, pause. Rhythmic and patient. I called Mrs. Kavanaugh the next morning. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "You heard it," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "It's not him." The knocking. Jonathan was left-handed. He wore his watch on his right wrist. But the sounds, they come from the left side, like someone else is in there with him. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, the lake is deep, Mr. Grant. 600 feet in some places. They found him floating, but he'd been on the bottom first. The pressure down there, it changes things, compresses them, makes them dense." I thought about the weight, 23 pounds, where there should be 6. "What came back with him?" I asked. "I don't know, but it's heavy, and it knocks, and it's not my brother." The knocking hasn't stopped. Every night at 9:47 p.m., 3 strikes, pause 3 strikes. I've documented it, recorded it, reported it to my supervisor, who doesn't believe me. But the weight is real. The condensation is real. The fingerprints that appear on the brass are real. Last week, Mrs. Kavanaugh asked me to move the urn to a different niche. I told her I couldn't without proper authorization. She said she understood. Then she asked if I'd ever heard 2 different knocking patterns. I lied and said no, but I have. Starting 3 nights ago, 2 patterns now, alternating, one from the left side of the urn, one from the right. Jonathan Kavanaugh is knocking back, and whatever came up from the deep with him is answering. The weight keeps increasing. 24 pounds now, 25, getting heavier every week, like something inside is growing, expanding, taking up space where there should only be ash. I clean 823 every morning, and every morning my arms shake a little more under the impossible weight of what we brought back from the lake. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, always waiting, always patient, always heavier than before. Not every burial comes with paperwork, and some arrive on their own. My name is James Park, and I have served as director of Crescent Hill Memorial Gardens in Savannah, Georgia for 21 years. In that time, I've learned that memorial parks run on documentation, purchase orders, burial permits, family authorizations. Everything has a paper trail. Everything is accounted for, until it isn't. Niche 17 in our columbarium was empty when I locked up on a Thursday night in August. I know because I walked past it during final rounds, making notes about which families had upcoming renewal dates. The niche was unpurchased, its interior dark and vacant behind the glass panel. By Friday morning, it was occupied. I noticed it immediately during my walkthrough. The urn sat centered in the niche, bronze with oxidized patina, looking like it had been there for years. A small arrangement of white carnations rested on the shelf below the glass. The nameplate was already installed. Samuel Thorne, born June 11th, 1897, died October 3rd, 1973. I stood there for several minutes trying to remember authorizing the installation. We had no services scheduled that week, no cremations pending. I pulled out my phone and checked our digital records. Niche 17, unpurchased, status available, no transaction history, no family contact, no burial permit on file. I called our main office. The administrator checked our files while I waited. Nothing here, James. 17's been empty since we opened that section in 2019. You sure someone didn't move an urn without logging it? Who would do that? Maybe maintenance? Sometimes they shuffle things during repairs. But I knew our maintenance staff. They logged every movement, every adjustment. They wouldn't relocate an urn without documentation. I went back to 17. The urn was substantial, well crafted, clearly expensive. The flowers were fresh, carnations still crisp, stems cleanly cut. Someone had been there recently. Someone had installed everything with professional care. I photographed the urn and nameplate, then checked our security footage. The cameras showed nothing. The columbarium hallway remained empty from Thursday's closing at 6 p.m. through Friday's opening at 8 a.m. No one entered. No one carried an urn. No one placed flowers. Yet there it was, solid and real and impossible. I called the police, thinking perhaps it was stolen property, something removed from another cemetery and dumped here. The officer who responded was polite but skeptical. You're reporting an urn that appeared by itself? I'm reporting unexplained property on our premises. He photographed everything, took notes, said he'd file a report. He didn't sound convinced. After he left, I tried to remove the urn. The glass panel was locked, standard magnetic lock, same as all our niches, but I hadn't locked it. I'd never opened it in the first place. I used my master key, hearing the mechanism click. The panel wouldn't budge. I tried again. The lock disengaged clearly. I could hear it, but the glass remained fixed, as if sealed by something beyond the magnetic mechanism. I called our maintenance supervisor. He arrived 20 minutes later with tools and a puzzled expression. Lock's working fine, he said, testing it repeatedly, but something's holding the panel, not the lock, something else. He tried prying it with a rubber mallet and plastic wedge. The glass didn't move, not even a millimeter. It's like it's welded shut from the inside, he said, but that's impossible. Glass panels don't weld. I asked him to leave it. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to damage the niche or the urn. Not until I understood what we were dealing with. That night, I researched Samuel Thorne. The dates on the nameplate placed his death over 50 years ago, which seemed impossible for such fresh flowers and pristine bronze. I found census records, birth certificates, military registration. Samuel Thorne existed, born in Savannah in 1897, drafted in World War I, died in 1973. But I found no death certificate, no burial record, no cremation documentation, nothing that explained where Samuel Thorne had been for the past 52 years or how his urn arrived in our columbarium overnight. I stayed late Friday, watching 17 from my office monitor. The camera had a clear view of the niche. I watched the urn sit motionless, hour after hour, the flowers perfect and still. At 11:37 p.m., a man appeared in the hallway. I blinked, certain I'd imagined it, but he was there on the monitor, elderly, wearing a dark suit, moving slowly down the row of niches. He stopped at 17, placed his hand on the glass panel, and stood there. I grabbed my keys and ran to the columbarium. The hallway was empty. I checked the monitor on my phone. The man was still there, standing at 17, his hand pressed against the glass. But when I looked up at the actual space, I saw nothing. I raised my phone, watching the monitor feed while standing in front of the physical niche. On screen, the man turned toward me, looked directly at the camera. His face was gaunt, tired, decades older than the death date would suggest. He mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I could read his lips. Let me stay. I stepped backward. On the monitor, he remained visible. In reality, the hallway was empty, except for me and rows of silent urns. Let me stay. He said it again, his hand still pressed against the glass that I couldn't open, protecting the urn I couldn't remove. I left the columbarium, locked it from the outside, sat in my office until dawn, watching the monitor feed show me an old man standing vigil over his own urn, whispering the same 3 words. By morning, he was gone from the screen. But the urn remained. I tried to remove it again Saturday morning. The glass panel still wouldn't open, despite the lock functioning perfectly. I contacted our legal team, explaining we had an unauthorized burial. They said we couldn't remove remains without family consent or court order. Find the family, they advised. But Samuel Thorne had no living family. I traced his lineage. He never married, had no children, outlived his siblings. He died alone in a boarding house in 1973. The boarding house was demolished in 1986. No one claimed his body. No one arranged his cremation. No record existed of what happened to Samuel Thorne after he died, until he appeared in niche 17. I stopped trying to remove the urn after that week. The flowers refresh themselves. Every Monday, fresh white carnations appear on the shelf. The glass remains sealed. The security footage occasionally shows the old man standing there, always at night, always alone. Last month, the niche next to 17, number 18, was purchased by a family. When they came to place their mother's urn, they asked about Samuel Thorne. Is he a relative? The dates are so old. I told them he was a previous resident. They seemed satisfied, but that night, I watched the monitor and saw Samuel standing at 17 again. This time, he wasn't alone. An elderly woman stood next to him, her hand also pressed against the glass of 18. She'd been dead for 3 days. Her urn wasn't scheduled for installation until the following week. I checked 18 the next morning. Empty. Unpurchased according to our records. But on Monday, when I arrived, her urn was there. Fresh flowers on the shelf, glass panel sealed shut. Everything installed with professional care that left no evidence of entry. Our records still show 18 as unpurchased. We have 6 more empty niches in that row. I watch them carefully now, waiting to see who else arrives without invitation, who else finds their way to Crescent Hill when no one's watching. The columbarium fills itself slowly, one impossible installation at a time. And in every night, if I check the monitors, I see them, residents who never made appointments, never signed contracts, never appeared in any database except the one death keeps for those who have nowhere else to go. Samuel Thorne was just the first. The flowers are always fresh. The glass never opens. And the dead keep arriving, filling empty spaces with urns we can't remove and names we can't verify, staying in the only place that will accept them without paperwork or questions. Let me stay, Samuel mouthed, so I did. And now they all do. Words can survive cremation, but I never believed it until I heard them myself. My name is Thea Morrison, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at Lakeside Memorial Gardens in Minneapolis, Minnesota for 9 years. In that time, I've learned to find peace in the quiet work, mowing grass, trimming hedges, maintaining the grounds where thousands rest. The cemetery is peaceful most days, the kind of silence that feels earned rather than empty. The urn in Garden Niche 41 changed that silence for me. It arrived in March of 2024. Copper vessel, elegant design, sealed and certified. The nameplate identified the deceased as Vincent Hale, 76 years old, former radio host for the local NPR station. His family requested garden interment, a niche built into the memorial wall near the reflecting pond, where visitors could sit and remember. I was present when they installed it. Small ceremony, maybe 20 people. Several mentioned Vincent's voice, how distinctive it was, how they'd grown up listening to him, how the city felt quieter without his evening broadcasts. 40 years on air, one woman said. That voice became part of people's lives. I thought it was a lovely tribute. Radio hosts leave echoes, I suppose, words that linger after they're gone. I started hearing the whispering during my evening rounds 2 weeks after the installation. Soft at first, barely audible over the wind moving through the trees. A steady murmur, rhythmic and measured, coming from the direction of the reflecting pond. I assumed it was water moving over rocks, or maybe wind through the memorial wall's architectural features. But when I approached Garden Niche 41, the sound clarified. Not water, not wind, words. I couldn't make them out. Too quiet, too fragmented, but the cadence was unmistakable. Someone speaking in careful, measured tones, professional delivery, the kind of voice trained for broadcast. I looked around. The garden was empty. No visitors, no staff, just me and the rows of niches and the sound that seemed to originate from the memorial wall itself. I pressed my ear against the stone near 41. The whispering was clearer there, though still not distinct enough to understand. It had rhythm, pacing, the rise and fall of practiced speech, like someone reading from a script. I stepped back, convinced I was imagining it. Auditory pareidolia, the mind creating patterns in random noise. Common in quiet places, especially cemeteries, where every sound feels weighted, but it continued. Every evening during my closing rounds, when the garden was empty and the light was failing, I heard it. Always the same location, always the same careful cadence. After a week, I started recording it on my phone. The audio captured something, faint but present. I sent it to our maintenance supervisor, thinking maybe there was a water leak or mechanical issue creating the sound. He listened to it twice, then handed the phone back. Sounds like someone talking, but that's impossible. There's nothing mechanical in that wall section. No pipes, no ventilation, just stone and niches. So what is it? He shrugged. Old buildings make strange noises. Old memorial walls especially. Probably just acoustic weirdness. But the sound wasn't random. It had structure, purpose. I began arriving earlier for evening rounds, trying to catch the exact moment it started. The whispering always began at 7:47 p.m., not approximate, exactly 7:47 every evening without variation. Vincent Hale's radio show had aired at 7:45 p.m. for 4 decades. I researched his broadcasts, finding archived recordings online. His voice was distinctive, warm, authoritative, carefully modulated, the kind of voice that commanded attention without demanding it. I listened to an archived episode, then returned to Garden Niche 41 at 7:47 p.m. The whispering matched his cadence exactly. Same rhythm, same careful pauses, same professional delivery, but I still couldn't make out the words. I mentioned it to Vincent's daughter when she visited the following week. She was placing fresh flowers on the niche shelf, yellow roses, which she said were his favorite. Have you ever heard anything unusual near your father's niche? I asked carefully. She paused, her hand still on the flowers. Like what? Sounds. Maybe like whispering? Her expression changed. Not surprise, recognition. You've heard it too. Too? My mother hears it. At home, in her bedroom. She says it's his voice, reading the evening broadcast, the one he was preparing before he died. She looked at the niche. He had a stroke at the station, mid-sentence. The recording equipment was still running when they found him. Did they save the recording? No. The station deleted it, said it wasn't appropriate to preserve. But my mother swears she can still hear him finishing what he started to say. What was he reading? A story about memory, about how voices persist in places they've inhabited, about how words can echo longer than the people who spoke them. She touched the nameplate. He believed radio waves never really die, that they just keep traveling outward, getting fainter, but never truly gone. I thought about that as I continued my rounds. Radio waves moving through space, carrying voices across infinite distance. Vincent Hale had spent 40 years broadcasting into the world. Maybe some part of that remained, finding its way back to where his physical form rested. At 7:47 p.m. that evening, I positioned myself directly in front of Garden Niche 41. I brought a directional microphone, the kind used for wildlife recording, and aimed it at the stone. The whispering began exactly on time. This time, with the enhanced audio, I could make out words. Memory persists in unexpected ways, voices we thought we'd lost, finding their way back to us, through static and silence, through stone and shadow. Vincent's voice, unmistakable, reading the script he'd died trying to finish. I recorded 5 minutes before the whispering faded. Then I checked the niche. It had shifted, not much, maybe 2 inches to the left. But I'd been watching it before the whispering started, and it had been centered. Now it faced the walkway, as if adjusted to project sound outward toward where visitors would stand. I examined the niche mounting. Secure, no looseness, no structural reason for movement. But over the following weeks, I noticed a pattern. Every evening, after the whispering session, the urn had turned slightly, sometimes left, sometimes right, always facing a different angle, as if searching for the best acoustic positioning. The words became clearer as the urn adjusted itself. By April, I could understand entire sentences without the directional microphone. Some of us leave echoes, patterns impressed into the fabric of space. 40 years of speaking into microphones, 40 years of voice becoming signal, and signals never truly stop. He was explaining what had happened to him. Using his broadcast voice to deliver his own eulogy in installments, 7:47 p.m. every evening, to anyone who cared to listen. Vincent's daughter visited again in May. I played her one of my recordings. She listened with tears running down her face. That's the segment he was reading when he died. He never got to finish it. He's finishing it now, I said. She nodded. My mother will want to hear this. She's been waiting months to know how it ended. I made her a copy of all my recordings. She thanked me and left, yellow roses placed carefully on the niche shelf. That evening, at 7:47 p.m., the whispering changed. Instead of the memorial segment, Vincent's voice said something new. Thank you for listening. Just those 4 words. Clear and distinct. Then silence. The urn had stopped shifting. It stayed centered, facing forward. Its position finally settled. The whispering hasn't returned since that night. The garden is quiet again during my evening rounds. Just wind and water and the normal sounds of a memorial space at dusk. But sometimes, when I walk past Garden Niche 41, I swear I can still hear it, faint and distant, like a radio signal from very far away. Vincent Hale's voice, still broadcasting, still finding its way back through static and silence. 40 years of speaking into the void, and the void, finally, learned to speak back. I keep my recordings. Sometimes I listen to them late at night, hearing a dead man explain how he managed to return, how voices persist, how memory finds its way home. 7:47 p.m. every evening, his broadcast time forever. Some grief is contagious, and I learned too late that sorrow can spread like disease. My name is Anton DeVries, and I have worked as a mortician at Riverside Memorial Chapel in Charleston, South Carolina, for 17 years. In that time, I've prepared bodies for viewing, arranged flowers for services, and learned to read the specific weight of grief in a family's eyes. Death is my profession, but grief is something I witness without ever fully understanding. The urn in row 7 West taught me that some grief doesn't belong to anyone living. It appeared in our memorial wall on a Tuesday in September 2024. Standard brass urn, no decorative elements, sealed and certified. The nameplate was minimal, just years, no name. 1947 to 2019. Nothing else, no first name, no last name, no epitaph. The family who commissioned it requested complete anonymity. No service, no visitors, no flowers. They paid in cash, provided the urn and nameplate, and left specific instructions that the niche never be disturbed. I thought it was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some families prefer privacy. Some deaths carry shame or complication. I respected their wishes and installed the urn without question. The flowers appeared the next morning, a small bouquet of white lilies placed on the shelf below the niche. I assumed family had visited overnight, despite their stated intentions. But when I checked our security footage, no one had entered the memorial chapel. The flowers simply appeared between midnight rounds and morning opening. I removed them, thinking perhaps they'd been left at the wrong niche by mistake. By the following morning, they'd returned. Same white lilies, same placement, same impossible arrival, with no visitor recorded. I stopped removing them after the third day. If someone wanted to leave flowers anonymously, I wouldn't interfere. But then I noticed something else. The flowers died quickly. Not the gradual wilting of cut flowers, rapid decay, turning black and brittle within hours of appearing. By afternoon, they'd be completely desiccated, petals crumbling to ash at the slightest touch. And visitors started crying, not visitors to row 7 West specifically, visitors to other niches, other sections of the memorial wall, people who came to honor their own deceased, who had no connection to the anonymous urn. They'd approach their family member's niche, and within minutes they'd be weeping uncontrollably. Not the expected grief of remembrance, something deeper, rawer, the kind of crying that comes from fresh loss, not old memories. I noticed it first with Mrs. Chen, who visited her husband's niche every Wednesday. She was always composed, peaceful, would sit quietly for 20 minutes before leaving. But that Wednesday, she broke down completely, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I had to help her to a bench, offer water, wait until she could speak again. I don't know what happened, she said, her voice shaking. I felt fine when I arrived. Then suddenly, it was like he'd just died yesterday, like I was losing him all over again. Her husband had been dead for 3 years. It happened again the next day. A different visitor, different niche, same overwhelming grief, then 5 times in one afternoon. People who'd made peace with their losses, suddenly drowning in fresh sorrow, as if death had struck them moments before. I started documenting the incidents, mapping where they occurred. A pattern emerged. Every breakdown happened within 20 feet of row 7 West. The closer someone got to the anonymous urn, the stronger the effect. At 15 feet, visitors reported feeling heavy. At 10 feet, tears would start. At 5 feet, complete emotional collapse. I tested it myself, approaching row 7 west during a quiet afternoon. At 20 feet, I felt fine. At 15 feet, a weight settled in my chest. At 10 feet, I was thinking about my father's death, something I'd processed years ago, something that shouldn't still hurt. At 5 feet, I was weeping, not for my father, for everything, for every loss I'd ever witnessed, every body I'd prepared, every family I'd comforted. 17 years of accumulated grief hit me simultaneously, and I couldn't breathe through it. I retreated to 15 feet. The weight lifted. By 20 feet, I was functional again, wiping my face and trying to understand what I'd just experienced. The urn was doing something, radiating something, grief that didn't belong to anyone specific, but affected everyone who came close. I called the number the family had provided during arrangements, disconnected. I checked the address, didn't exist. The payment receipt led nowhere. Whoever had commissioned this burial had erased themselves completely. I researched the dates, 1947 to 2019, 72 years. A long life by most measures. But the nameplate felt intentional in its anonymity, not someone forgotten, someone deliberately unnamed. The flowers continued appearing nightly, white lilies that turned black by noon, and the crying spread, first within 20 feet, then 25, then 30. The radius of grief expanded weekly, pulling more visitors into its influence. People stopped coming to the memorial chapel. Our visitor numbers dropped by half in 3 weeks. Those who did come avoided the west wall entirely, sensing something wrong even if they couldn't articulate it. I tried covering the niche. The grief penetrated through fabric. I tried removing the urn. The glass panel wouldn't open, despite functioning locks. I tried moving visitors to different sections. They'd still break down if they came too close to the west wall. In desperation, I visited the crematory that had processed the remains. They had minimal records, cremation performed per standard procedures, ashes returned in provided urn, but one detail caught my attention. The family requested we include something with the ashes, the operator said, checking his notes. Personal effects. We do that sometimes. What kind of personal effects? We don't document specifics, privacy regulations. But I remember this one because it was unusual. They wanted us to include letters, dozens of them, handwritten. They said the deceased had carried them for years. Love letters? I didn't read them, but the family member who delivered them was crying, said they were letters from people who'd died, that the deceased had kept them as a burden, carrying other people's grief until it consumed them. Letters from the dead, mixed with the ashes of someone who'd carried them for 72 years. Grief compounded and compressed and cremated together, now radiating outward through brass and stone. I understood then. The urn didn't contain one person's remains. It contained accumulated sorrow, decades of collected grief from others, compressed into ash and sealed but not contained. It leaked through the barriers we'd built, affecting everyone who came close. I stopped trying to remove it. The family's instructions were clear. Never disturb. Perhaps they knew what would happen if the seal broke, if all that concentrated grief escaped at once. Last week, the radius reached 50 feet. Half the memorial chapel is now unusable. Visitors can't approach without breaking down. Even staff members avoid the west wall. The flowers still appear nightly, white lilies that turn to ash by afternoon, as if they're absorbing some of what the urn releases, taking on the grief and dying from it. I've requested the chapel be closed for renovations. Management is considering it. Meanwhile, I watch row 7 west from a safe distance, seeing the occasional visitor wander too close and collapse under the weight of sorrow that isn't theirs. 1947 to 2019. 72 years of carrying other people's grief. And now it carries on without them, spreading through our memorial wall like an infection of sorrow, teaching us that some burdens don't end with cremation. They just find new ways to be shared. I cry sometimes, even at 40 feet, feeling the edges of it reaching for me. The urn sits silent in its niche, nameless and patient, waiting for the day its glass seal fails and all that accumulated grief finally escapes. Mirrors show what is, but polished brass sometimes shows what isn't. My name is June Nakamura, and I have worked as a caretaker at Harbor View Memorial Columbarium in Seattle, Washington, for 11 years. In that time, I've learned to see my own face reflected in hundreds of brass urns while I polish them. It's meditative work, circular motions, steady pressure, watching tarnish disappear and shine emerge. You see yourself in the metal, always yourself, until you don't. The urn in niche 432 reflects someone else. It arrived in June of 2024. Standard brass construction, well made, properly sealed. The nameplate identified Patricia Lawson, 81 years old, died peacefully in her sleep. Her granddaughter commissioned the placement and requested I give the urn extra care. Grandmother loved beautiful things, she said. She'd want the brass to shine. I assured her I'd maintain it properly. I've always taken pride in my work, each urn polished weekly, each nameplate gleaming. The dead deserve beauty, even in their containers. I first polished Patricia Lawson's urn on a Wednesday morning, early enough that the columbarium was empty. Natural light from the skylights made the brass easy to work with. I applied polish in smooth circles, watching my reflection appear in the curved surface as the tarnish lifted. Except the reflection wasn't mine. I stopped mid-motion, staring at the brass. A face looked back at me. Definitely a face. Definitely in the urn's polished surface. But not my face. An elderly woman, thin features, white hair, eyes that seemed focused on something beyond the metal. I stepped back, looked around the columbarium. Empty. Just me and rows of niches and morning light. I looked back at the urn. My own reflection stared back at me now. Asian features, dark hair, my face, exactly as it should be. I convinced myself it was a trick of light, an artifact of the polishing angle. I finished the work quickly and moved on. But it happened again the following Wednesday, same position, same polishing motion. My reflection would appear normally for several seconds, then shift. become someone else, the elderly woman again, same thin features, same distant eyes, looking at something I couldn't see. This time, I didn't move. I stayed perfectly still, watching the wrong reflection stare back at me from brass that should only show my own face. She blinked, I didn't. She tilted her head slightly. I remained motionless. Then she smiled, not a happy smile, a sad, knowing smile that seemed to acknowledge my presence while focusing on something else entirely. I dropped my polishing cloth. The sound echoed through the empty columbarium. When I looked back at the urn, my own face reflected normally again. I pulled up Patricia Lawson's funeral service photos on my phone. The woman in the reflection was Patricia. I was seeing the deceased reflecting back at me from her own urn. I told myself it was grief-induced pareidolia. The human brain is pattern seeking, especially with faces. I'd seen Patricia's photo, knew whose ashes I was polishing, and my mind created the connection. Except I hadn't seen her photo until after I'd seen the reflection. I checked our security footage. The cameras covered the main columbarium floor, including niche 432. I rewound to my polishing session, watching myself work. On camera, I polished normally for 30 seconds. Then I froze, staring at the urn for 11 minutes. Completely still, not breathing, not blinking, just staring. I don't remember those 11 minutes. I remember working, seeing the reflection, dropping the cloth. But the footage showed something else, a gap in my consciousness where I stood motionless, looking at something that held my attention completely. I downloaded the video and examined it frame by frame. At minute 4, my expression changed. I smiled, not my usual smile, someone else's smile, sad and knowing, exactly like the reflection I'd seen in the brass. I called in sick the next Wednesday, let another caretaker handle the polishing, but Thursday morning, our supervisor called me. June, did you polish the urns in section 4 yesterday? No, I was out. Sarah covered my route. She says you were there, said you polished 432 for over an hour. She saw you. That's impossible. I wasn't in the building. Silence. Then, can you come in? We need to talk. I drove to the columbarium. The supervisor met me in his office with Sarah, who looked uncomfortable and confused. Tell him what you saw, the supervisor said. Sarah spoke quietly. I was polishing section 3 when I noticed you at 432. You'd been there a while, so I checked on you, asked if you were okay. You smiled at me and said you were fine. Then you kept polishing. What time was this? Around 10 a.m. You stayed until 11:30. I watched you the whole time because something felt wrong. You never stopped polishing, just kept working the same urn over and over, like you were trapped in a loop. I checked the timestamp on my phone. I'd been at a doctor's appointment at 10 a.m., 20 minutes from the columbarium. I showed them my appointment confirmation. We went to the security footage. At 10:03 a.m., someone who looked exactly like me entered the columbarium, walked directly to 432, and began polishing. They worked for 1 hour and 27 minutes, never stopping, never changing position. At 11:30, they placed the polishing cloth on the shelf, smiled at the camera, and walked toward the exit. The footage showed them leave through the main door, but the exterior camera showed no one exiting. They simply vanished between the interior and exterior feeds. "Who was that?" Sarah whispered. I didn't answer. I was thinking about 11 minutes of missing time, about a reflection that wasn't mine, about standing motionless while something else controlled my expression. I went to niche 432. The brass was polished to perfection, better than I'd ever achieved, mirror bright, flawless. I looked at my reflection in the curved surface. Patricia Lawson looked back. Not a glimpse, not a trick of light. Her face replacing mine completely, staring at me from the urn that contained her ashes. She raised one hand, my hand, but I wasn't controlling it. Pressed it against the glass panel from my side. I felt myself move, felt my arm raise without my permission, felt my hand press against the glass, matching the gesture I was watching in the reflection. Then the supervisor touched my shoulder, and I was back. My own face in the brass, my own hand falling to my side. 11 seconds of missing time, according to his watch. "You okay, Jun?" I wasn't, but I said yes. I requested a route change, got reassigned to Section 1, far from 432. Another caretaker took over my old route. They lasted 3 weeks. I heard them talking about it in the break room, about losing time at 432, about seeing wrong reflections, about feeling themselves move without choosing to, about standing motionless while something else polished Patricia Lawson's urn using their hands. The columbarium installed a cover over 4 to 32 frosted glass that obscured the urn's surface. No more reflections, no more polishing required. But last week I was working late in Section 1 when I felt the pull. That specific awareness of being watched. I turned toward Section 4, across the columbarium floor. The frosted glass cover was gone. The urn's brass surface gleamed, perfectly polished, and in its reflection, visible from 40 feet away, Patricia Lawson stood at 432, not inside the niche, standing in front of it, my body, my uniform, my face that wasn't my face. She waved. I felt my hand raise and wave back. Then the supervisor called my name from his office, breaking the connection. When I looked again, the cover was back in place, the reflection gone. I checked the security footage later. At 8:17 p.m., someone matching my appearance walked to 432, removed the frosted cover, and polished the urn for exactly 11 minutes. Then they replaced the cover and walked away. The cameras show them exiting the building, but I was in Section 1 the entire time. I've requested a transfer to groundskeeping, outdoor work, no polished brass, no reflections. My supervisor approved it. He understands, I think. He's seen the footage, knows something uses 432 as a mirror, reflecting outward, finding people who stand close enough to see themselves in brass. And sometimes, when the reflection looks back, it doesn't just show you what you look like. It shows you what you could be if you stood still long enough. If you polished brass in perfect circles for 11 minutes without blinking. If you let someone else borrow your reflection and forgot to take it back. I start groundskeeping next week. Patricia Lawson's urn still gleams in 432, polished weekly by caretakers who lose minutes they can't account for. I don't look at brass anymore. I avoid mirrors. And sometimes, in store windows or car doors or any reflective surface, I see her looking out at me, smiling that sad, knowing smile, still polishing, still waiting for someone to stand still long enough to stay. Family knows things we don't, and sometimes I wish they'd warned me sooner. My name is Catherine Walsh, and I have served as director of Maplewood Memorial Chapel in Burlington, Vermont for 13 years. In that time, I've handled thousands of requests, families asking for specific flowers, particular music, certain arrangements that honor their loved ones in personal ways. I've learned to listen carefully, to respect the wishes of the grieving, even when those wishes seem unusual. But I never expected a family to tell me their mother was asking to leave. The Hendricks family came to me on a cold morning in October 2024. Three siblings, two daughters, and a son, all in their 50s. They wanted to relocate their mother's urn from niche 12 in our columbarium to a different location. Standard request, except for the reason they gave. She wants to leave, the eldest daughter said. She keeps asking. I assumed she meant before death. Perhaps the mother had expressed a preference for burial over cremation, or wanted her ashes scattered instead of interred. Families sometimes have regrets about their choices. When did she express this preference? I asked gently. Last Tuesday, and Wednesday, and every night since. I looked up from my paperwork. I'm sorry. When did your mother pass? March 17th, 6 months ago. The room went quiet. I chose my words carefully. I understand grief can manifest in many ways. Sometimes we feel we hear our loved ones, especially in the first year. We're not imagining it, the son interrupted. She speaks to us, clearly, in our homes, asking to be moved. I've dealt with grief psychosis before. Families hearing voices, seeing their deceased, convinced of continued presence. It's a normal part of processing loss for some people. I started to explain this gently. The younger daughter pulled out her phone. Would you like to hear her? Before I could respond, she played a recording, static at first, then a voice, elderly, strained, unmistakably distressed. Please, I need to leave this place. Please move me. The voice was coming from inside their mother's house, according to the daughter. Recorded at 3 a.m. on Tuesday. The mother had been dead for 6 months. That could be anything, I said carefully. Old recordings, radio interference. It's her voice, the eldest daughter said. We know our mother, and she's not at peace. I wanted to dismiss it, but something in their expressions stopped me. This wasn't delusion or grief. This was three rational adults, clearly uncomfortable, asking for help with something they didn't understand. Let me review our records, I said. I'll see what we can do. After they left, I went to niche 12. Margaret Hendricks's urn sat exactly where we'd placed it 6 months earlier. Bronze vessel, standard size, properly sealed, nothing unusual. I placed my hand on the glass panel. The temperature was normal, no sounds, No movement, just an urn containing ashes, exactly as it should be. I checked our maintenance logs. No issues reported. The niche was structurally sound, properly sealed, well maintained. But that night, I stayed late. I'm not sure why. Something about the family's certainty, their shared experience, made me want to understand. At 11:43 p.m., I was in my office when I heard it. A voice, faint, coming from the columbarium. Please, someone, I need to leave. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the memorial hall. The voice was clearer there, echoing slightly off the marble walls. Please, it's wrong. I shouldn't be here. It was coming from niche 12. I approached slowly, my flashlight beam steady on Margaret Hendricks's nameplate. The voice continued, muffled but distinct, as if someone was speaking from inside a closed room. Please help me. I need to go. I need to leave this place. I pressed my ear against the glass panel. The voice was definitely in the niche, behind the sealed urn, where sound shouldn't originate. Mrs. Hendricks? I said quietly, feeling foolish. The voice stopped. For several seconds, silence. Then, yes, please, help me leave. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I returned to my office and pulled Margaret Hendricks's file. Standard cremation authorization, signed by all 3 children. Death certificate listed natural causes, heart failure. Cremation performed at our contracted facility. Ashes returned in standard urn. Nothing irregular, except one notation I'd missed before. A small note in the transport log, written by our crematory liaison. Family requested we check urn seal 3 times. Said mother was claustrophobic. I called the crematory the next morning. The operator remembered the case. Yeah, the family was really concerned about the sealing process. Kept asking if there was any way to make it less confining. We explained cremated remains don't experience claustrophobia, obviously, but they were insistent. Did anything unusual happen during the cremation? Long pause. Actually, yes, the retort malfunctioned mid-process. We had to restart it. Never happened before or since, but everything was completed properly. Standard protocols. When did it malfunction? About halfway through, right when the temperature peaks, almost like something interfered with the heating elements. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I went back to niche 12. In daylight, it looked completely normal, but I knew what I'd heard. I opened the glass panel using my master key and carefully removed the urn. It was sealed properly. Standard threaded lid, tightened securely. But when I examined it closely, I noticed something, scratches on the interior threading, faint but visible, as if something had been turning the lid from the inside. I photographed them and sent the images to our crematory contact. He called back within an hour. Those are fresh scratches, made after sealing, but that's impossible. Nothing inside an urn can create that kind of abrasion pattern. I looked at the urn sitting on my desk, at the scratches that shouldn't exist, at the seal that had been tested 3 times because a family feared their claustrophobic mother might somehow know she was confined. That evening, I called the Hendricks family, asked them to come in the next morning. I didn't tell them what I'd found. They arrived together, looking exhausted. The son spoke first. She's getting more insistent, louder, She woke all of us last night, screaming to be let out. I'll authorize the relocation, I said. But first, I need you to tell me something. Did your mother ever mention being buried alive? Any phobias related to confinement? The eldest daughter nodded slowly. Her grandmother was declared dead during the Spanish flu. They'd already closed the casket when someone heard knocking. They opened it just in time. Mother grew up hearing that story. She had nightmares about it her entire life. She made us promise, the younger daughter added, made us swear we'd never bury her, that cremation was safer because no one could trap her underground. But cremation has its own container, I said quietly. They understood. The fear had followed Margaret Hendricks beyond death, beyond cremation, into the sealed bronze urn where her ashes waited. I showed them the scratches, explained what I'd heard. They weren't surprised. Where does she want to go? I asked. Scattered, the son said, in the lake behind her childhood home. Open water, no container, no confinement. I authorized the release that afternoon, watched the family take their mother's urn, heard one of them whisper, "Soon, Mom, soon you'll be free." The next morning they called. They'd scattered the ashes at sunrise. The voice had stopped immediately. No more requests, no more pleading. Margaret Hendricks was finally somewhere open and vast, no longer trapped in bronze and glass and her own consuming fear. I went back to niche 12, opened the empty space, found something I'd missed before. Metal shavings on the shelf, tiny brass curls, like those produced by threading, by something turning a seal from the inside, trying to unscrew itself, trying to open a lid that could only be opened from the outside. I collected them in a small bag, kept them in my desk as a reminder. Some fears survive everything, even fire, even death, even the reduction to ash. And sometimes the dead ask for help. The only question is whether we're listening. Dust accumulates on everything eventually, but some urns collect more than others. My name is Yuki Tanaka, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at Willowbrook Memorial Gardens in Sacramento, California for 8 years. In that time, I've learned that maintenance follows predictable patterns. Leaves fall seasonally, stone weathers gradually, dust settles evenly. The memorial garden requires daily attention, but the work is steady and comprehensible. Garden Niche 9 changed that understanding for me. The niche is built into our western memorial wall, sheltered by a flowering dogwood tree that blooms white in spring. The urn inside belongs to Daniel Reese, 47 years old when he died. The nameplate gives no cause of death, just dates. Born September 9th, 1976, died June 3rd, 2024. I first noticed the dust problem in late June, 2 weeks after the installation. The memorial garden is meticulously maintained. I dust the niches every morning, removing pollen and leaf debris before visitors arrive. Most niches stay clean for 24 hours minimum. Some stay pristine for days. Garden Niche 9 accumulated dust overnight. Heavy accumulation, thick enough to obscure the brass nameplate by morning. The first time, I assumed wind had stirred up soil from the garden beds. I cleaned it thoroughly and moved on. The next morning, equally dusty, same thick coating, same gray brown color. I checked the surrounding niches. Clean. Only 9 showed accumulation. I tested for environmental causes, checked drainage, examined the dogwood for diseased bark that might create powder, inspected the stone for degradation. Nothing explained the rapid dust buildup. By the end of the first week, I was cleaning 9 twice daily. By the second week, 3 times. The dust would return within hours, coating the glass panel and nameplate in a fine layer that felt wrong under my cloth, grittier than pollen, heavier than soil. Then I found the insects. Small ones at first. Gnats and fruit flies, dead on the niche shelf, pressed against the glass in perfect circles. Their bodies formed rings, like they'd been flying around something before dying mid-flight. I cleared them away. By the next morning, more had appeared. Larger insects this time, beetles, moths, even a small dragonfly. All dead, all arranged in circular patterns against the glass. I called our pest control service. They inspected the wall, found no nests or infestations, no explanation for the dead insects. It's like they're drawn to this specific spot, the technician said. Then they just die. I've never seen behavior like this. Why circles? I asked. He shrugged. No idea. Insects don't organize themselves geometrically when they die. This is abnormal. I started photographing the patterns. Perfect circles, varying in diameter, sometimes 3 or 4 rings nested inside each other. The insect's flames formed the circumference with mathematical precision. Between the dust and the dead insects, I was cleaning niche 9 5 times daily. The accumulation rate was increasing. What took 24 hours initially now took 4 hours. By mid-July, I was cleaning it hourly during my shift. The dust became my obsession. I collected samples, examined them under magnification. The particles weren't uniform. Soil, pollen, leaf matter, normal garden debris, but also something else. Fine gray powder that didn't match any local material. I sent a sample to a university lab for analysis. They called me a week later. The powder is cremated remains, the analyst said. Human cremains, specifically, mixed with the standard environmental particles. That's impossible. The urn is sealed. I'm just telling you what we found. Bone ash, processed to standard crematory consistency. It's definitely human. I examined Daniel Reese's urn more carefully. The seal was intact. No cracks, no openings, nothing that would allow ash to escape. But the dust kept accumulating, and now I knew what it contained. I researched Daniel's death. Limited information available. No obituary, no news articles. I contacted the family through our records department. They were reluctant to talk, but eventually agreed to a brief conversation. Daniel's death was unexpected, his sister told me. The autopsy said unknown causes. He was healthy, no medical conditions. He just stopped. Stopped? Cardiac arrest. But they never found a reason. His heart just quit. Can I ask where he died? Long silence. In a research facility, he was part of a medical study. They were testing something, I don't remember what. Some kind of pharmaceutical trial. He'd been in the study for 6 months when it happened. Did other participants die? I don't know. The facility shut down right after. Legal issues, I think. We never got clear answers. After that conversation, I looked at the dust differently, at the insects dying in perfect circles, at the accelerating accumulation rate, as if something was escaping the urn faster and faster. The death certificate listed Daniel's cause of death as unknown, but the facility name was noted, Grayson Pharmaceutical Research Center. I searched for it, found nothing current, but archived news articles from 2024 mentioned a pharmaceutical trial that had been shut down by the FDA after adverse events. 3 participants died, all from sudden cardiac arrest, all tested positive for an experimental compound that was supposed to extend cellular longevity. The compound's name was Vitadust. I contacted the FDA office that had handled the case. They couldn't give me specific information, but they confirmed the study had been investigating cellular preservation, trying to slow death at the molecular level. Did it work? I asked. In a sense, it slowed cellular death, but it didn't stop it. The cells just took longer to die, much longer, and when they finally did, the decay was unusual. Unusual how? Accelerated conversion to particulate matter. The bodies degraded into dust faster than normal decomposition, almost like the cells were making up for lost time. I thought about the dust accumulating on Niche 9, about cremains mixed with environmental particles, about Daniel Reese's body, treated with a compound designed to slow death, cremated, but somehow still dying, still converting to dust faster than it should. I stopped cleaning the niche. I wanted to see what would happen if I let the accumulation continue. Within 3 days, the dust was an inch thick. Within a week, it had begun spilling onto the ground. The insects kept coming, hundreds now, forming elaborate circular patterns across the glass before dying. The dust wasn't random anymore. It was forming shapes, patterns in the accumulation that looked almost deliberate. Letters, maybe, or numbers. I photographed them daily, watching the patterns shift and reform. On the 15th day, I saw the word clearly, help, written in dust on the glass panel of niche 9, 4 letters formed by the differential thickness of accumulated ash. Help. I cleaned it immediately, scrubbed the glass until it gleamed. By the next morning, it had returned. Help. Same formation, same desperate clarity. I contacted Daniel's sister again, told her what I'd found. She was silent for a long time. The researchers said the compound worked on a cellular level, that it would delay death indefinitely if they could perfect the dosage. But it didn't delay death. It just made it slower, made every cell die individually instead of all at once. What are you saying? I'm saying Daniel is still dying, has been dying since June, will keep dying, cell by cell, molecule by molecule, until every particle that was him finally stops. How long will that take? They didn't know. Years, maybe, decades. The cells in the trial survivors, the ones who didn't die right away, they're still breaking down, still producing dust, still asking for help we can't give them. I look at Garden Niche 9 every morning, watch the dust accumulate faster each day. See the insects drawn to something they can't resist, dying in patterns that seem to mean something. Help appears in the dust 3 times a week now. Sometimes other words. Stop, please, still here. I clean them away. They return. The dust never stops. Daniel Reese died in June, but his cells are still dying, still converting to ash, still escaping the sealed urn particle by particle, still asking for help while they slowly cease to exist. The university analyst called last week, said my latest sample showed something new. The cremains are fresher than they should be, like they were just produced, but that's impossible. Cremation happened months ago. Nothing about Niche 9 is possible, but every morning I clean away the dust, and every morning it returns, heavier than before, faster than before, dying, still dying, forever dying, one cell at a time. Temperature doesn't lie, and some cold goes deeper than weather can explain. My name is Garrett Simmons, and I have worked as a mortician at Seaside Memorial Chapel in Newport, Rhode Island for 14 years. In that time, I've learned to maintain perfect climate control, 68 degrees year-round, 35% humidity, consistent and stable. Bodies and urns require specific conditions. Families deserve a comfortable environment. Everything stays balanced, except the air around niche 27. The urn arrived in July of 2024. Copper vessel, beautifully crafted, sealed, and certified. The nameplate identified Thomas Brenner, 61 years old, died in a house fire. His daughter arranged the placement and made an unusual request. Only put half of him there, she said. I asked her to clarify. We scattered half his ashes at sea. He wanted part of him in water, but I need part of him here, where I can visit. Which half did you choose? I asked, trying to understand her decision-making process. The half that wanted to go, she said quietly. He told me before he died, said half of him wanted to leave, the other half wanted to stay. I gave the ocean the half that wanted to go. I didn't understand what she meant, but grief produces strange logic. I installed the urn without further questions. The temperature drop began immediately. I noticed it during my afternoon rounds, the day after installation. The columbarium maintained its standard 68 degrees everywhere, except near niche 27. The air there felt noticeably cooler. I checked the thermostat, still showing 68, but my skin knew better. I grabbed a temperature probe from our preparation room, pointed it at the air surrounding 27, 48 degrees, 20 degrees colder than the rest of the space. A localized cold pocket with no apparent source. I checked the HVAC system, functioning normally. No cold air ducts near that section, no windows, no external walls, nothing that would create a temperature differential, but the cold remained, persistent, specific, contained to a roughly 6-foot radius around Thomas Brenner's urn. I called our HVAC contractor. He spent 3 hours examining the system, checking airflow, measuring temperature gradients. He found nothing wrong. It's like the cold is generating from that spot, he said, not flowing from somewhere else, actually originating there. But that's thermodynamically impossible without a cooling source. He left, baffled. The cold stayed. Within a week, I could see my breath when I approached 27. In July, in a climate controlled building, my breath fogged in the air at 6 feet. At 3 feet, frost began forming on the glass panel. I documented everything with photographs and temperature readings. The coldest point was directly in front of the urn, 38 degrees. Cold enough for frost. Cold enough to make the glass opaque with ice crystals. Visitors started noticing. They'd approach to view other niches, then back away quickly when they felt the temperature drop. "Is your air conditioning broken?" they'd ask. I didn't have an answer that made sense. Thomas Brenner's daughter visited in early August. I watched her approach 27, saw her stop at the edge of the cold zone. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "It's him," she said, "the half that wanted to stay. It's cold because he died in fire. I don't understand. My father burned to death. The heat, it was the last thing he felt. When I scattered half his ashes in the ocean, I felt warmth, like the water was hot, even though it wasn't. The half that wanted freedom took the heat with it." She looked at the frosted glass. "The half that wanted to stay, it's the part that's still burning, still trying to escape the fire. The cold is resistance, opposition, the absence of what killed him." "That's not scientifically possible," I said gently. "Neither is 20-degree temperature drops without a cooling source, but here we are." She reached out and touched the frosted glass. Her hand left a clear print in the ice. Through the cleared space, the copper urn was visible, covered in condensation. "He's fighting it still," she said. "Fighting the heat, even though he's dead, even though only half of him is here." After she left, I examined the urn more closely. The condensation was unusual, not the kind formed by warm air meeting cold surface. This looked like condensation forming from the inside out, as if something inside the urn was releasing moisture, trying to cool itself. I checked the seal, intact. No leaks, no way for moisture to escape or enter. But the condensation kept forming, drops running down the copper, freezing when they reached the glass, building up layer by layer. The temperature continued dropping. By September, it was 32 degrees at the center. Freezing, ice formed on the shelf below the urn. The glass panel was completely opaque with frost. I had to close that section of the columbarium. Too cold for visitors. Too unexplainable to justify, but I kept monitoring it, watching the temperature drop degree by degree, 30 degrees, 28, 25. At 20 degrees, I heard the sound, a faint crackling, like ice forming rapidly on water, coming from inside the urn. I pressed my ear against the frosted glass, my breath visible in thick clouds. The crackling continued, steady, rhythmic, like something freezing and refreezing repeatedly. I researched Thomas Brenner's death. House fire in March 2024. He'd been trapped on the second floor. The fire report estimated temperatures exceeded 1,000 degrees in the room where he died. He'd been found near a window, apparently trying to escape. The autopsy mentioned severe thermal trauma, but one detail caught my attention. His lungs contained water, not smoke residue. Water. Aspirated water prior to death, the medical examiner noted. Source unknown. No water sources in immediate vicinity of body. Thomas Brenner had breathed water while burning to death in a room with no water source. I thought about the daughter's words, the half that wanted to go, the half that took the heat, the half scattered in the ocean where water could finally cool the burning, and the half that stayed, the half still trying to freeze itself, still generating cold to fight heat that had already consumed it months ago. The temperature reached 10 degrees in October. The ice on the glass was 2 inches thick. I couldn't see the urn anymore, just layers of frost that built up daily, despite my attempts to clear them. At 0 degrees, the crackling changed to something else. Breathing, labored, wet breathing, the sound of lungs struggling with water, coming from behind the ice, behind the sealed urn, from ashes that couldn't breathe, but were trying anyway. I called the daughter, told her what I was hearing. Is he suffering? She asked. I didn't know how to answer. I think he's still dying. The fire burned for 3 hours before they put it out. He was alive for most of it. The coroner said he would have been conscious. Her voice broke. He drowned himself, found a pipe, broke it, breathed the water on purpose, anything to stop the burning, the water in his lungs. He chose drowning over burning, and I split him in half, sent one part to water, kept one part here, but the part here, it's still burning, isn't it? Still trying to find water, still trying to drown. The temperature hit -5 degrees last week. The columbarium's heating system can't compensate anymore. That entire section is freezing over. Ice spreads from niche 27 in crystalline patterns. The breathing sound is constant now. Desperate gasps, the sound of someone drowning while burning while frozen. I've recommended we relocate the urn. My supervisor agreed, but when we tried to open the glass panel, it shattered. Too cold, too brittle. The ice was too thick to clear safely. Thomas Brenner's urn is locked behind 2 inches of ice in -5 degree air, trying to drown in ashes that can't hold water, fighting fire that ended months ago. The daughter asked me to scatter the rest of him in the ocean. Reunite the halves, she said. Let the part that's burning finally reach the water. But the glass is shattered, the ice is impenetrable, and the temperature keeps dropping, -10 degrees now. My breath freezes mid-exhale when I check on it. The breathing sound continues, wet and desperate and impossible, lungs made of ash, trying to fill with water that doesn't exist, fighting fire with cold, dying by degrees, still burning, still drowning, still trying to choose between two deaths that already claimed him, and the cold spread slowly outward, claiming more niches every week, turning our columbarium into Thomas Brenner's personal winter, his personal drowning pool, his escape from flames that only he can still feel. Currency changes over time, but some payments never stop being made. My name is Diego Reyes, and I have served as director of Riverside Memorial Gardens in San Antonio, Texas, for 16 years. In that time, I've seen countless traditions, families leaving flowers, photographs, personal items at grave sites and niches. These offerings represent connection, memory, ongoing relationships with the deceased. I respect all of them, but the coins at niche 18 confound me in ways I can't explain. The urn belongs to Robert Castellano, born June 7th, 1964, died September 22nd, 2024. Standard brass vessel, professionally installed, properly sealed. His family requested minimal service. No visitors, no flowers, just the urn and nameplate. They paid cash and left. The coins appeared the morning after installation, 3 of them, placed in a neat row on the shelf below the niche. I assumed a visitor had left them, perhaps a family member, despite their stated preferences. I collected them during my morning rounds, dropping them in the donation box we keep for such findings. The next morning, 3 more coins. Same placement, same neat alignment. I checked our security footage. The cameras covered the columbarium entrance and main floor, recording continuously. I reviewed the overnight footage from both nights. No visitors, no one entering the building, no one approaching niche 18. Yet the coins appeared each morning, perfectly placed, as if someone had positioned them with care. I examined them more closely on the third morning. They weren't modern currency. Old coins, mercury dimes dated 1964, the year Robert Castellano was born. I collected them again, this time placing them in an envelope marked with the date and location. By morning, 3 new coins had appeared. Different dates this time: 1965, 1966, 1967. Sequential years, the pattern continued daily. 3 coins each morning, dates advancing chronologically through the 1960s and into the 70s. All mercury dimes, all discontinued currency that hadn't been minted since 1945. I researched mercury dimes. They were replaced by Roosevelt dimes in 1946. The coins appearing at niche 18 were obsolete currency, some over 80 years old. After 2 weeks, I'd collected over 40 coins. The dates had progressed into the 1980s. I spread them across my desk, noting the chronological sequence. They were telling a story in years, every date representing something in Robert Castellano's life. I tried to research his history. Limited information available, no obituary, no social media presence, just bare facts. Born 64, died 24. 60 years reduced to numbers. But the coins continued their chronicle, 1985, 1986, advancing through the decades. On the morning the coins reached 1992, I found something else with them. A small folded paper, aged and yellowed. I unfolded it carefully. A receipt, handwritten, dated March 3rd, 1992. Paid in full, debt settled, RC, Robert Castellano's initials. I stared at the receipt, then at the coins. Someone or something was leaving payment, marking dates with currency, settling debts year by year. I stayed late that night, watching the security monitor. The camera showed niche 18 clearly. I watched from 9 p.m. until 3 a.m., seeing nothing. At 6 a.m., I checked the niche, 3 new coins. Dates from 1993. I reviewed the footage from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Empty columbarium, no movement, no visitors. just the static image of rows of niches and marble floors. Yet the coins appeared. I contacted Robert's family through our records. The phone number reached his brother, who was reluctant to talk but eventually agreed to answer questions. Did Robert have any connection to coin collecting, specifically Mercury dimes? Silence. Then, where are you getting this information? Someone's been leaving coins at his niche, old dimes. I'm trying to understand if it's a family tradition. No one in our family is leaving anything. We all agreed. No visits. Robert didn't want visitors. Can you tell me why? Long pause. My brother had debts, not money debts, other kinds. He said he owed people things he could never repay. That's why he didn't want anyone at his resting place. He was afraid they'd come for payment. Who would come? He never said. But near the end, he was terrified, said they were counting the years, that every year was another coin in the collection, that when they had them all, they'd come to collect. Collect what? I don't know. He died before explaining, but he made me promise no visitors, no offerings, nothing that would invite them to his grave. After that conversation, I looked at the growing pile of coins differently, not offerings of remembrance, payments being made by someone or something tracking Robert Castellano's years. The dates progressed into the 2000s, 2001, 2005, 2010, marching toward the present. On the morning the coins dated 2024 appeared, I found another note, newer paper this time, fresh ink. Collection complete, payment due. I showed it to security. They reviewed every camera angle, every minute of footage. Nothing. No one entered. No one approached. The note simply appeared, along with the final 3 coins representing Robert Castellano's last year of life. That night, I stayed in the columbarium, sat in the dark memorial hall, watching Niche 18 directly. No cameras, no monitors, just me and the rows of urns and the question of what comes to collect when payment is complete. At 3:14 a.m., I felt the temperature drop. Not dramatically, just a few degrees. Enough to notice. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the entrance despite the locked doors. I turned on my flashlight. The beam showed an empty hallway, but the footsteps continued, moving closer, stopping at niche 18. I approached cautiously, no one visible, but the air near 18 was different, thicker, somehow, dense with presence. I watched the shelf below the niche, watched coins materialize, not placed, not dropped, simply appearing, one at a time. Mercury dimes, dated 1964, a complete set, 60 dimes total, one for each year of Robert Castellano's life. Then the presence moved to the urn itself. I felt it more than saw it, something pressing against the glass panel. Not hands, not physical, but pressure, intention. The urn shifted inside the niche, turned slightly. The seal began rotating. I stepped forward. What do you want? The footsteps stopped. The pressure released, and a voice spoke, not aloud, but directly into my mind. Collection complete. He paid in years. Now we collect the payment. He's dead. What more can you take? Not take. Collect. He borrowed time. Now time comes home. The seal continued rotating. The urn opened slightly, just enough for something to escape. not ash, not physical substance, something else, something that looked like smoke but moved like liquid light. It rose from the urn, coalescing into a shape I couldn't quite see. Then it moved toward the entrance, the footsteps resuming, fading into distance. The urn sealed itself. The coins remained on the shelf. 60 mercury dimes, perfectly aligned. I examined the urn the next morning. The seal was tight, properly closed, but when I checked the weight, it was lighter than before, significantly lighter, as if something that had mass, that had weight, had been removed. I weighed it 3 times. Same result. The urn now contained approximately half the ash it should have. Robert Castellano had borrowed time somehow, lived on borrowed years, and when he died, someone came to collect what was owed, not in coins, in something else, something measured in weight and presence. The coin stopped appearing after that night. The shelf below 18 stays an empty now, but sometimes during night rounds, I feel that thickness in the air again, that presence, that sense of debts being calculated, payments being tallied, and I wonder how many of our residents paid for their years with something other than time. How many borrowed? How many owed? How many are still waiting for collection? The mercury dimes sit in my desk drawer, 60 of them, obsolete currency from a debt I don't understand. Payment in full, the receipt said. But Robert Castellano gave back half his ashes to settle accounts. What currency buys you extra years? And what interest accumulates when you can't pay it back? I don't know, but I keep the coins as reminder. Some debts follow you through death, and some collectors never stop counting. Time moves forward for everyone except those who wait in wax and silence. My name is Miriam Foster, and I have worked as a caretaker at Oakmont Memorial Columbarium in Boston, Massachusetts for 23 years. In that time, I've tended thousands of urns, learned to read nameplates like brief biographies, and understood that every vessel contains not just ashes, but the end of someone's story. Most stories are complete when they reach me. The urn in niche 47 is still being written. It arrived on a cold morning in November 2024, different from our standard installations. The family insisted on handling the placement themselves, unusual but not prohibited. 3 siblings, all in their 70s, carrying a brass urn sealed with red wax and wrapped in ceremony I didn't recognize. They placed it in 47 with careful precision. Then the eldest produced a small card, handwritten in elegant script. This must be attached to the glass panel, she said. It's crucial. This instruction cannot be ignored. The card read, "Do not open until 2045, 21 years in the future." I don't understand, I said. The urn is already sealed. What would we be opening? The niche, the glass panel, this urn must not be disturbed, viewed, or accessed until November 14th, 2045. On that exact date, no sooner. Can you tell me why? The eldest sister looked at her siblings, who nodded. Our father had very specific arrangements before he died. He was particular about timing. He believed certain things should not be rushed. Your father is in this urn? Yes, and he's waiting. Waiting for what? For the date he specified, for the moment he chose. He was a mathematician. He calculated something we don't understand, but we promised to honor his wishes. They left shortly after, declining to provide additional information. I attached the card to the glass panel with conservation tape, noting the strange request in our maintenance log. The urn sat behind its sealed glass, marked with its cryptic instruction. I checked on it weekly during rounds, seeing nothing unusual, just brass and wax and silence, until I heard the tapping. 3 months after installation, late evening during winter rounds, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from the western wall. I followed it to niche 47. Tap, tap, tap. Regular intervals, patient percussion, coming from inside the niche, behind the sealed glass. I pressed my ear against the panel. The tapping was definitely internal, originating from the urn itself, steady as a metronome, deliberate as a code. I checked the wax seal, intact, no cracks, no evidence of tampering, but the tapping continued. 3 strikes, pause, 3 strikes, pause, always the same rhythm. I made a note in the log, reported potential structural settling, convinced myself it was thermal expansion, metal adjusting to temperature changes. But the tapping became regular. Every evening during rounds, same time, 8:47 p.m., same rhythm, same patient persistence. After a week, I started counting the intervals. 3 taps, 5-second pause, repeat. I timed it precisely, never varied, mechanical in its consistency. I researched the father, Dr. Marcus Webb, mathematician and physicist, died at 89. Published extensively on temporal mechanics, theoretical physics, and something called duration calculation. His final paper, published 2 months before his death, was titled Weighting Variables and Predetermined Outcomes. I found a copy online. It was dense, mathematical, mostly incomprehensible to me, but one passage stood out. Time is not uniform in its experience. What appears as 21 years externally may function differently for a consciousness operating outside standard temporal flow. Waiting becomes calculation. Patience becomes an equation, and the date of opening becomes the moment when both timelines converge. I didn't understand what it meant, but I thought about the tapping, about Dr. Webb waiting inside a sealed urn with a specified opening date 2 decades away. The tapping evolved over the following months. Still rhythmic, still regular, but the pattern changed, not random changes, progressive changes, as if counting, marking time. I started recording it, documented the pattern shifts, noticed they occurred monthly, always on the 14th. November 14th, December 14th, January 14th. Each shift subtle but distinct. By the first anniversary of installation, the pattern had changed 12 times, 12 variations, 12 months marked and counted. I contacted the Webb siblings. The youngest answered, her voice cautious. Has something happened with Father's urn? I've been hearing sounds, tapping. It seems to be marking time. Long silence. He told us that might happen. He said not to worry, that he was simply counting. Counting what? The days until 2045. He calculated it precisely 7,670 days from his death to the opening date. He said he'd count them all. That consciousness doesn't end with cremation if you know how to preserve it mathematically. That's not possible. Father spent 50 years working on temporal consciousness. He believed awareness could persist if properly calibrated, that time itself could be experienced differently with the right calculations. You're saying he's conscious inside the urn? I'm saying he's waiting and counting and marking each day until the date he specified. I thought about that, about Dr. Marcus Webb's ashes sealed in brass and wax, counting days in the darkness, tapping out a rhythm that changed monthly, marking years that passed differently for him than for the rest of us. The tapping continued, never stopped. Every evening, 8:47 p.m., the patient percussion of someone counting down from 7,670 days. I calculated where we are now, approximately 400 days into his count. 7,270 days remaining. The pattern grows more complex each month. What started as simple three-tap sequences has evolved into elaborate rhythms. Codes, maybe. Mathematics expressed in percussion. Time measured in sound. Storm nights are different. During heavy weather, when thunder rolls and rain pounds the building, the tapping intensifies. Faster, more urgent, as if Dr. Webb is responding to external stimuli, aware of the world beyond his brass confinement. I tested this theory 3 months ago. During a thunderstorm, I went to 47 and knocked on the glass panel. 3 strikes, deliberate. The tapping inside stopped. Silence for exactly 5 seconds. Then 3 answering taps. Clear, responsive. He heard me, responded, acknowledged communication across the barrier of death and metal and sealed glass. I haven't knocked again. I'm not sure I should disturb someone counting their way through 21 years of conscious darkness. But sometimes, during quiet evenings, I sit near 47 and listen. The tapping has become familiar, comforting almost, a reminder that time passes differently for everyone, that patience can be calculated, that waiting is its own kind of mathematics. Last week, I found a second note attached to the glass panel, not from the family, fresh ink, handwritten in elegant script that matches the original instruction. Day 407, 7,263 remaining. Thank you for listening. M.W. Dr. Marcus Webb, writing from inside his urn, counting, calculating, waiting for November 14th, 2045, when his timeline and hours finally converge, when the glass panel opens, when 21 years of patient counting reach their conclusion, when we learn what a mathematician finds after spending 2 decades conscious in darkness, marking every single day. The tapping continues tonight. Same rhythm, same precision, same eternal patience. Tap, tap, tap. 7,263 days until opening, and Dr. Marcus Webb counts every one. Not sleeping, not resting, just waiting in his calculated darkness, experiencing time as an equation only he understands. I'll be retired by 2045, but I've asked my replacement to contact me when the date arrives. I want to be there when they open the glass panel, when they break the wax seal, when they learn what Dr. Webb has been doing for 21 years, what messages he's been tapping, what calculations he's been making, what he's been counting toward in the darkness. Until then, the tapping continues. Patient, mathematical, eternal 7,263 days. 7,262 days. 7,261 days. Counting down to a moment he chose before he died. A convergence point he calculated with precision. The day when waiting becomes answer, when silence becomes revelation, when Dr. Marcus Webb's experiment in conscious duration finally reaches its conclusion. Tap, tap, tap. I listen. I document. I wait alongside him, and the count continues, always counting, never stopping, marking time, in the darkness with patience that outlasts death itself.